everybody, welcome back to Game of the Week. I am Nian, and unfortunately we didn't have a Game of the Week last week because we had, of course, the tier list that came up, but we have a Game of the Week this week. This one was actually suggested to me by camat0. He was one of the players who played in this game. It was in the team league. We're not starting with his deck. We're going to start with Trumpets' deck, which is in some respects more important for this analysis, I think. Couple cards specifically to point out. This is an Icaria Blue deck. You've seen this before. You more or less know what is in here, but some specific cards to point out. We have 4 copies of Torch, 2 copies of Lightning Strike as damage-based removal. We have a little bit higher density than normal of mid-range units because we are playing the 3 Valkyrie Enforcers. A lot of other versions haven't been playing that recently, but we have a full 3 of those in this version of the deck. There's the Justice-based market in this version of Icaria Blue, which is, I think, pretty typical for the Icaria Blue decks. They tend to favor that version of the market, which one of the cards that it has there is Omen Austerity, which is an important one in the course of this game. Outside of that, there's nothing too unusual about this particular composition. I guess that there's a couple of extra rune hammers than what we sometimes see. So 3 copies of that and then 2 copies of Rise to the Challenge. So those are the things that are relevant for this deck. Keep that in mind. Also, just kind of general composition of the market. Vanquish, Omen of Austerity, Harsh Rule, Rizan, and Icaria. So from that, let's take a look at the removal pile deck, which is piloted by camat0. It's funny to call this one stock because part of the reason that it's stock is because it's camat0's deck. Like, he kind of defines what the stock removal pile decks are, but you know, that's fine though. Ultimately, this means this is a deck that you've definitely seen before. The thing that I would point out though is it is playing 4 copies of Annihilate, and I don't know if you noticed this, but that's really bad in the Icaria Blue matchup. I mean, technically, yes, it can hit those little green men that fly in the mid game, but those aren't really what matter in the game. The game is much more defined around, you know, angels and Valkyries that hit really hard and especially, you know, fly in the air. So those are not exactly vulnerable to Annihilate. Outside of that, just note the composition of the market. We have a copy of Boar, Jawbone Greatsword, 1 copy of the Statuary Maiden, Rizan, and Icaria herself. I don't think there's very much more that needs to be talked about. So let's get into the game. Now, I am going to mention right off the bat, this is going to look a little bit different than the Game of the Weeks of the previous week. That's because I pulled this specifically off of the Grim Fans stream. This was the Team League, of course, that was taking place over the course of the weekend. Congratulations to Sea Power Gaming that won that. But I think that this is a particularly interesting game to see from the one side. I mean, camat0 was the one who recommended this. He's the one who's actually playing the deck. But the advantage of seeing this from the one side, I think, is quite nice and quite useful. You are going to see Grimfan hang out in the corner of the screen, although you're not going to hear him. He's talking to his teammates, but that's all muted. But be sure to go check out his stream as well to support him, another great content creator in the community. I'm also going to be speeding up a little bit through some sections of the video because they do talk a good deal about reasoning through their plays, which is fine. This is a good tournament in order to do that. So let's talk about the matchup just a touch before we get into some interesting decisions. This is Icaria Blue versus Removal Pile, as I mentioned off the top, and this is a matchup that's really about the Valkyries, the big Valkyries, 6 and 7, Rizan and Icaria. Icaria especially is a card that it hits really hard. Those Warcry bonuses really matter on a weapon, and she's one of the most important cards in the matchup. The cards that you see in camat0's hand right now are not good for this matchup specifically. The Wanted poster is a good card against more mid-rangey decks because you can consistently play it, kill something, get your 2 cards, continue going on with your life. But in this case, it's actually pretty bad because you're not going to see a lot of targets for it, especially in the early game. As a result, you kind of have this question of whether or not you're actually going to be able to get anything done with it. We also have Annihilate drawn, as I mentioned in the deck tech section. This is really bad in this matchup, although the Merchant is obviously going to pair well with that because you can get rid of your Annihilate. That sucks. So with this, we are moving into the period of the game where some decisions begin to become interesting. So on this next turn, camat0 is going to have the opportunity to play the Merchant and has to make a decision based on how he thinks his hand is going to turn out over the course of the next few turns, because this is a matchup, as I mentioned, it's defined by these big angels, but his hand is pretty bad, and he probably doesn't have the materials to fight that fight. If he uses the merchant to get something like Rizon, for example, he could get Rizon, but Rizon is much worse in this matchup compared to Icaria. Getting the Icaria feels a little bit preemptive, especially given the power situation that is available right now. There's only one Justice Sigil. That's something that is going to weigh in your mind a lot when you're making these kinds of decisions about how easy is it going to be to cast it. So getting the Icaria seems really rough. So as a result, they're put into this position about what they are going to sort of gamble on. Are they going to gamble that Rizon is going to be impactful enough to matter in this game, and they're going to find the extra justice? Are they going to try and find 2 extra justice and gamble on the Icaria that they'll be able to cast that in time? Or do they want to go for something a little bit less impactful, like the Jawbone Greatsword or the Statuary Maiden? Statuary Maiden, once again, similar to it, they annihilate really bad in this matchup because there's not a lot of generic units that are hanging around to get value off of. So with that choice, that has the problem of not really pairing very well with anything. It's a low impact threat. So they actually choose to go for the Greatsword. This is really fascinating because what they're actually kind of saying, they're trying to set up, is just going aggro, just hitting them for 8 3 turns in a row and see what they can do with that, which is a really bold play given the nature of how this matchup tends to play out. But once you think once again about how this hand was looking, when you have the Annihilate, you have these cards that don't really match up well against anything, it seems like a really unintuitive play. And their decision ends up being saying, yeah, we're just gonna go aggro. We're just gonna try and kill them in this time. Obviously they could have something like a torch. They could have something like a lightning strike to mess up this play, and that would really suck. But we kind of have to make that risk given the fact that our hand is so bad, especially how it looked the previous turn when they were playing out the merchant. Now, one of the things I am going to mention is that a lot of the thoughts that I'm going to be giving here are summarizations of some of the things that they're saying in the course of these discussions they're discussing on stream. Not going to saying that I'm totally breaking the mold here. I have a really good insight into what they were thinking about, but yeah, so they are really considering about what's bad that could happen here. And some of the particular lines they're talking about is like, well, what happens if they have a removal spell for the merchant and then can follow up with a rune hammer? They did notice a pause in the course of the attack for the merchant, which could suggest that there is a torch or a lightning strike for the greatsword, but they probably would have used those on the merchant because the Jawbone Greatsword is an unusual play. Also, it could just be the Wisdom of the Elders, which is a more logical card to have in the situation. There wasn't a pause in the previous turn, in case you didn't catch that, for the merchant, so there's no way of knowing whether or not there would be a torch in the hand that costs 1. It's the only 1-cost spell that would be available in the deck. But yeah, this is the setup that we have right now. They do think about it for a little bit longer, but then eventually they decide to just go for the Greatsword, jam in, hope to be able to get some damage done because they don't think that they can win a long game given the composition of their hand. We do get the Wisdom of the Elders out of the opponent. They called it, we called it, moving on to the next turn. Now we do get a nice long thought out of the opponent, but we can't really see what's going on there, so we're going to take this moment to talk a little bit about the channel. Make sure that you like and subscribe and comment. Give me your comments on what you would have done with that merchant given that situation, what you thought the correct play was, whether you thought that was a little bit too bold, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Also, if you want to have your games analyzed for this doesn't need to be top-tier competitive games only. I'm willing to look at something like a noob-focused one every now and then. That'd be a lot of fun. So if you do make recordings, maybe you are a Twitch streamer and you want me to take a look at a game that is particularly sweet that you did, I'd love to do that. I'd love to get that content and love to support other creators. But anyway, their opponent now is in a rough position because they can probably figure out what the plan is coming out of camat0's side. The reason why is because this is a pretty aggressive play, and even like the knowing that the Jawbone Greatsword came from the market really signals that this is an active plan that isn't just, I happen to have these cards, I'm going to start using them. It's like, no, I'm deciding that I'm going to go aggro. So they are now making some tough decisions, filtering through their deck, trying to get deeper into their deck for some specific cards that can get them out of the situation. So what are some of those cards? What matters here? There are a handful that I can identify that seem relevant. We are getting closer to the Rizon turn. Rizon is, of course, really, really good on this board because it can either eat the 3/3 or it can eat the weapon. Either one would be a pretty swingy sort of a turn. We can also just get any sort of burn effect, would be able to kill the weapon or the merchant as well. That'd be another thing that would be wonderful to have access to. One that is also particularly interesting would be having access to the merchant, as it would allow access to the Omen of Austerity as well. Now, camat0 has really switched into gear of deciding, yes, I am going to try to kill my opponent. That's what the game is about right now, as you see choosing something like a torch in this situation. It should be noted, of course, at this point that Trumpets is definitely getting low. He does find the Merchant, which helps alleviate some of this pressure. It grabs the Omen of Austerity to take down the Jawbone. Great sword. This still leaves him under a lot of pressure, though. He's getting really close to burn range. So this question now, this position, is another interesting decision point. And once again, comment below what you would do here. But yeah, we have the opportunity to Wanted Poster plus Slay the 2/2, which is an interesting play because it does get you the 2 cards, but you also have options of whether you're going to use the Torch or the Slay. And the reason why you would want to use the Torch is that your opponent's at 9 life. They're almost dead. You're getting them into Torch range if you're able to have a 1/0 mana Torch in your hand. On the other hand, Slay is really worth keeping in case you run into a Rizon. Rizon would be absolutely devastating in this board state, especially if you took a hit from it. So there's a lot of attraction in saying, I'm going to keep this Slay around, try to kill a potential Rizon if I see one next turn. My opponent has also seen a lot of cards and filtered through their deck a lot. They're checking to make sure that they would have maybe an undepleted power next turn. They think that that's very likely given the way that the game has played out. But yeah, what are we going to do? Are we going to say, yeah, we don't have a Rizon, or I think that I can beat a Rizon some other way? You're also drawing a lot of cards right here over the course of the next couple of turns because you're going to be able to Slay the 2/2, draw 2 cards from that. Next turn, you're drawing a card, and even beyond that, we have access to the quarry as well. So if there is a Rizon that gets played, maybe we have another option of how to handle it, and it's not necessary that we keep the Slay just for that purpose, especially how good the Torch is if they don't have exactly Rizon. We finally get the Slay out of camat0, draw 2 cards, and they're not stellar ones. Unfortunately, one might wonder about whether or not you're supposed to play the power, the scout power first or after the wanted poster. It doesn't actually matter in this particular situation. It's trivial and arbitrary. But anyway, we get in, we deal some damage. Our opponent is at a virtual 3, which is really exciting, especially when we have that Merchant on the top of our deck, which we can use to get a Rizon as well. If that's how the game ends up panning out, we get our own burn spell from that, and then we pass the turn to the opponent. The opponent clearly doesn't have the Rizon because I don't think there will be very much of a decision at this juncture. There really isn't anything that you could do that would be better than a Rizon here. So they're not playing it, and that's a good sign for Team Eternal Titans. Trumpets does end up playing an Orc Runehammer after all things are said and done. This does give a very slight amount of life gain, which does keep him out of lethal range right now. camat0's turn again. Gonna spin the wheels a little bit. This is just correct play, of course, doing things like quarrying first. If you follow this up with call the deck in order to just see what you have access to. You're not spending all your power yet. You're still able to do everything that you wanted to do and do that first, but it's always correct to draw cards first if there's an option. We do have another Torch in hand, which is a lovely card to have access to in this position because now we have 9 points of burn and an opponent at 7. Going to be playing out the 3/3. We also have an interesting decision that they made here that they didn't torch the rune hammer. Part of the reason is because they knew that the opponent couldn't attack with the rune hammer, realistically, because it's going to be just dealing 3 damage to themselves, and they know that they're in burn range. They know that their opponent has been super aggressive this game and might be setting up a lethal like this. So the best play that's available to them is playing at the Icaria, but this sets up a guaranteed lethal for Team's Eternal Titans. Really tight game, really ballsy calls out of camat0 and Team Eternal Titans, but able to set up the win. Thank you so much for joining me today. Congratulations to the winners, which was Seat Power Games in this event. If you haven't had a chance, please like, subscribe, and share the channel and the video. Also, I have another wonderful video that came out this morning that I was really happy about that you should check out if you haven't had a chance, and an article that's associated with it. It's not related to Eternal, but I think it's really interesting anyway. So follow me on all the social medias. You can find links for that below. Thank you so much for checking this out today. Take care, everybody.